And so it's my pleasure to introduce our Provost, Dr. Laurie McCauley. She is Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. She oversees the university's academic and budgetary affairs. And some people may not know, but Wallace House actually reports into the Provost office. Of course, we're not a program that is matriculating students through the university, and we're part of the university's portfolio of global and engaged learning. And events like this, where we are talking to the community, talking to students, talking to people about around the country about the great things happening at the university and in our programs at Wallace House, are an expression of the university's commitment to global and engaged learning. The deans of the 19 schools and colleges all report to Dr. McCauley, as do the vice provosts. She is an active researcher supported by the National Institutes of Health for more than 25 years. Her work focuses on the ways hormones can build bone. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to tell you what I was told it was okay for me to say. The role of immune cells in bone health and the spread of prostate cancer to the skeleton, and there's a long description of what her expertise is, but she's a bone doctor. And prior to her appointment as provost, she served as dean of the School of Dentistry, where she actively worked to reduce student debt and oversaw a $142 million expansion and renovation of the dental school's facilities. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McCauley to welcome you and our fellows.
Thank you, Lynette. That was awesome. Thank you for the introduction, but importantly for your leadership of the Wallace House. It's truly a gem on our campus. So thank you. Yes, that's worth applauding. So good evening. It's so great to see so many familiar faces here, and what a wonderful vibe in this space that we have here. I'm really delighted to join you for the Hovey Lecture, and this is one of the university's great traditions, and what a great evening that we have to have it. It is also an honor to welcome the 52nd cohort of the Knight-Wallace Fellows. As we know, each year this program brings together remarkable journalists from around the world, and each year I'm reminded of why their work matters so profoundly to our democracy. This year, the welcome feels different. It's always a time of celebration, and it's a place where journalists from around the world can talk shop about the state of the world, which in fact is not always a bright topic. And today has brought the sharpest possible relief, as we're only a day out from the tragic murder of Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University. Whatever our political differences, this kind of attack is an attack on all of us, on every person who believes in the power of words. Many of you in this room have reported from or lived in places where political violence has become normalized, and you know how quickly societies can spiral when that line is crossed. You understand how hard it is to break that cycle once it begins. We have two choices as a society, the same two choices every democracy faces. We can settle our differences through speech, or we can settle them through violence. There's no middle ground. Events like this are a tragedy for the victim, his family, and for all of us. And my heart goes out to his family and to the university community at Utah Valley. All of us are one step away from a path of destruction and violence. It's always true, but especially true today. When I see this unassuming house, and I was just so taken by the room where it happens in the front, I'm inevitably inspired. Like Michigan Stadium, our law library, or the steps of the Michigan Union, where JFK spontaneously created the Peace Corps, the Wallace House is a Michigan icon. It's emblematic of something deep in the marrow of our enterprise the search for truth in a world of noise. It's a symbol of keeping us as a society informed and accountable. It's a symbol of replacing speculation with investigation, propaganda with facts, and sensationalism with nuance. This feels especially difficult right now. But as journalists, you know this has never been easy. If you've heard the phrase superficial, sudden, unsifted, too fast for the truth, you might think I'm talking about social media. But in fact, it comes from a New York Times article about the telegraph that was printed in 1858. Superficial, sudden, unsifted, too fast for the truth. Solid journalism has been in a fraught relationship with technology for a very long time. In every era, challenges have been characterized, in the media, of course, as existential. A headline in the magazine Editor and Publisher from 1928 read, quote, "Giving news to radio viewed as a menace to newspapers." Journalism has routinely been declared dead by some each year, and yet, here you all are. And yet, we're living at an extraordinary moment for the vocation, even by historical standards. The economic models that sustain newsrooms for generations have changed. Trust in the media has fractured along partisan lines, and increasingly, those in power seek to operate without accountability, dismissing inconvenient truth as fake news, even as actual fake news is being manufactured at scale. So what are we doing here? Well, I'm here to say the Knight-Wallace Fellows give me great optimism. This program, this year of your life, is a chance to take a breath. Here at Wallace House, something vital endures. This program represents a bet, one that Mike Wallace made decades ago, that if you give talented journalists time to think, space to explore, and access to a world-class university, and yes, Lynette was right, the university is open to you, they will emerge stronger and better equipped to serve the public good. That bet has never been more important than it is today. Wallace House offers more than sanctuary. It offers renewal and growth. The fellows joining us will spend the coming months diving deep into subjects that fascinate them, building new expertise, and finding fresh angles on the stories that matter most. They'll have access to our researchers studying everything from quantum computing to constitutional law, from public health to social movements. And our campus will be enriched by their global perspectives, their probing questions, and their commitment to truth-telling. So tonight's lecture speaks directly to one of the most consequential stories of our time, the transformation of the federal workforce. When career civil servants are dismissed, we all have a stake in understanding what's happening and why. Andrea Hsu's reporting from inside federal agencies facing mass terminations reveals that not just policy changes, but human consequences occur. Her work reminds us that behind every bureaucratic acronym are real people doing real work that affects real lives. As someone who oversees a large public institution, I know how critical it is to have journalists who can explain these complex systems and hold them accountable. Thank you all for attending the 38th Graham Hovey Lecture. I am so happy to be here and to listen to our speaker. And fellows, welcome to the University of Michigan, and get prepared to be saying a lot of "Go Blues."
So I'm going to turn things over to our speaker, Andrea Hsu. I hope you've read about her in your program. Andrea is the labor and workforce reporter for NPR. She was a 2011-12 Knight-Wallace Fellow. She started her career in the BBC's Beijing Bureau, and she was with the staff of All Things Considered for 2 decades before she moved into a reporting role. As she'll tell you, she started her work covering changing labor and workforce norms in the United States during COVID, because it was a topic that needed covering, because so much about the way we work was changing. And then this year, the beat changed incredibly. So we welcome Andrea to share her thoughts.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you for your kind words, Dr. McCauley. Also, thank you for your thoughtful words. It's so great to be back here at Wallace House, Charles and Julia. It's just wonderful to see you here, and it's an honor to be here. To be invited back to this program that gave me so much. It's been 14 years since I started this program, and I look back on this fellowship with the same kind of nostalgia I have for college. And in many ways, it was a lot like college, which I think you'll find out. You get to go to class and do assignments, at least some of them, and you meet some really incredible people here. You'll meet professors, of course, and a treat from the year I was here is Ralph Williams in the English department. He just happened to come out of retirement the spring semester when I was here, and I jumped at the chance to take his class on the writings of Primo Levi, the Italian chemist and Holocaust survivor. And I have to say, Professor Williams and his theatrical hands lived up to the hype. And I managed to snag a souvenir before I left Ann Arbor. And, I still wear the shirt around DC sometimes with this yay, nay on it. So, and there was also my faculty advisor from the year I was here, Dr. Tim Johnson, who at the time was the head of OBGYN at the hospital. And I had just come off of a series at NPR, producing a series on childbirth around the world. And Dr. Johnson was a giant in maternal health, both here and abroad. He had set up a training program in Ghana and just transformed maternal and reproductive health there. He did the same thing in Ethiopia. And I learned that he had passed this spring, and I wanted to remember him here tonight. But the real gift of this fellowship, that is the gift that keeps on giving, are the friendships I made here, right here at Wallace House. Many hours spent, in seminars, cooking meals together, crammed in that dining room. I don't think you all have done that yet. You have 35 people crammed in the dining room, eating a meal that 2 of you will have cooked. Just enjoy every moment here. I make Wallace House your second home. I can't tell you how much every day I thank this fellowship for what it's given me. Today, so as Lynette mentioned, I am NPR's labor and workplace correspondent, and I got this job about 4 years ago in the spring of 2021. And for the first few years I had this job, I did almost no reporting on the federal workforce. I had been living in DC for about 20 years at that point, and I had friends and neighbors who were federal workers, and sometimes we talked about work, but by and large, their jobs were really stable. They didn't really make the news. And meanwhile, as Lynette mentioned, there was so much else blowing up on my beat. The whole work from home revolution sparked by COVID, and then the rollback of that, the wave of union organizing at Amazon, warehouses, at Starbucks cafes. In 2022, I talked to so many baristas around the country. Then in 2023, there was the UAW strike, and I came out here and talked to auto workers on the picket line outside the Ford plant in Wayne, and then I drove down to Toledo, and I stood outside the Jeep plant, and I heard more stories. But my job totally changed on January 20th of this year, as soon as Donald Trump was sworn in as president for a second time. And I knew from his first term that he had plans for the federal workforce, unfinished business from his first term, ideas that he had launched too late that he was going to resurrect. So we knew change was coming. And still, I was surprised, as were many people both inside and outside the government, at how swiftly he began remaking the federal government. And the government is vast. It's the biggest employer in the country, around 2.4 million civilian employees who work all over the US. And something I didn't know until I started all this reporting is that something like 80 or 85% of them don't live in the DC metropolitan area. So they're all over the country. And the government is made up of so many different parts, so many different agencies, many of which I just had never heard of before this year. So since January, I have been on the steep learning curve, both trying to keep up with everything that's happening and trying to understand the problems that the Trump administration says it wants to solve: the bloat, the waste, the inefficiency, the deep state. And I've been trying to assess whether the steps they're taking are solving these problems. And I'm still working on answering that question, but I do have some insights, and I thought I would share 3 of them here tonight that I hope will give you at least a window into what's happening and why it matters. And I'll start with this. President Trump came into office promising big changes, and it was clear from the start that his administration was taking a move fast, break things approach. But what's also become clear is that the stakes are totally different. You know, failure may be celebrated in Silicon Valley as part of the process, but in government, you have hundreds of millions of people relying on you, and there are consequences for swift action. So 2 things happened in the first few weeks after the inauguration that kept me really busy, probably the busiest I've ever been at NPR. First, on January 28th, an email went out to almost the entire federal workforce. The subject line was "Fork in the Road." The Trump administration, through Elon Musk, was inviting more than 2 million people to resign in exchange for pay and benefits through the end of this month, September. And all you had to do, according to the email, was reply with the word "resign." And it wasn't just the one email. Federal employees were getting emails about this every couple days, and each time the terms of the offer had changed a little bit. And I was writing story after story for the radio and for our website, trying to keep up, trying to relay what I was hearing from employment attorneys and from the Trump administration about whether this offer was real. A friend of mine told me she saw links to my stories shared on the Fed News Reddit thread. So I felt this intense pressure and responsibility to keep up with every incremental development, which is not something we tend to do at NPR because we just don't have the kind of staffing to keep up with that. And then just as that story was calming down, a second unfathomable thing happened, which is that agencies fired nearly all their probationary workers en masse. Now we know it was some 24,000 people fired in February. And these were mostly more recent hires, people who were in their first or second year on the job, but some were people who had been with the government for a long time and had been promoted into new jobs, and many of them were veterans. No administration had done something like this, used the probationary period in this way, so immediately there were lawsuits. And I got a crash course in how to follow court cases. I spent hours reading these court filings, and I discovered the website Court Listener, which is a great free resource. And I had also started to use Signal, the messaging app. Not long before this, I started to use Signal with my colleagues, mainly just gossiping about work stuff. But now my Signal inbox was filling with messages day and night over the weekends. First I had federal workers sharing all those fork in the road emails that were coming. Then I started getting messages from people who had been fired. And some of them just wanted to vent. Some wanted to, make sure that they could get they were desperate to get the word out about what was happening. Some shared how stressed they were. And I remember one gentleman wrote me and told me he was so stressed he was thinking of hurting himself. And I remember it was a Sunday morning and I kind of panicked and I called up our health editor at NPR to ask, what could I do about this? And I ended up encouraging him to call 988, the suicide crisis line. But that was, sort of the tone, to give you a sense of what was happening. It was just real chaos at that time. Now, one person I spoke with was this guy, Derek Copeland. He'd been working for the Department of Agriculture in Georgia, outside Atlanta, for an agency called the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And their mission is protecting the health of American agriculture. And Copeland's job was training dogs, training those beagles that you sometimes see at baggage claim at the airports, and they're sniffing out agricultural products that aren't allowed into the US. And Derek Copeland had been at the USDA for something like 11 days, less than 1 year. He was almost done with his probationary period. But he really knew dogs. He had spent 2 decades in the Air Force, most of that time in canine units. He managed kennels, and he trained dogs to sniff out narcotics and explosives. And he had served in the military long enough to retire. And like many veterans, he found work in the federal government making use of those skills that he had built up in the military. And by all accounts, he was doing great. He sent me his performance appraisal, and in every category, he had been rated fully successful. And still in the middle of February, Derek Copeland got a letter saying, based on his performance, he had not demonstrated that his future employment was in the public interest. He was being fired despite his stellar performance review, despite the fact that he'd been told the dog training center was ramping up, and despite his 20 years of service to the country. And as you can imagine, Copeland was just furious about this. You know, most of the federal employees who reach out to me, they don't want to be quoted by name. They don't want to talk on tape. They're just really scared. But Derek Copeland said, yeah, use my name. Put me on the radio. Take my photo. He was not scared. He knew what had happened to him was wrong, and he wanted to speak out about it. And as I mentioned, there were legal challenges, and briefly USDA was ordered to reinstate their probationary employees, but it turned out to be temporary. And Copeland didn't wait around to see if he'd be fired again. In April, USDA offered a second round of those fork-in-the-road buyouts, same offer as before, and he took it because he thought there was a good chance he would be fired again, a second time. And we later found out that some 15,000 USDA employees took the fork-in-the-road offer between January and April. So many, in fact, that after repeatedly warning staff that they may be laid off if they didn't take the buyout, USDA said it would not be doing mass layoffs after all. So the Trump administration did succeed in reducing headcount at USDA and at many other agencies, but almost immediately there seemed to be some consternation over who was leaving. At the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, some people were invited to rescind their resignations. The Secretary of Agriculture authorized exceptions to the government-wide hiring freeze to fill key positions. It appeared that the move fast, break things approach had left the agency scrambling to ensure it could still fulfill its mission protecting America's farms. Now, just last week, Derek Copeland told me he's actually offered to go back to the dog training center. He's still waiting to see how this shakes out. But even after all he's been through, he still wants to serve the American people. And this leads me to the second insight I want to share. Federal workers really care about their work because they know how important their work is to the country. And they work hard to ensure that Americans can depend on the government to do certain things. But now some are finding their ability to do their jobs has been hampered. And we saw this play out the other week at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. First, President Trump fired the agency's director, Susan Menares. She wrote in the Wall Street Journal that she'd been pressured to fire senior staff and to pre-approve recommendations of the vaccine advisory panel that's meeting next week. And she refused, and Trump fired her. And after that, several senior leaders at the CDC resigned. Now, this isn't a story I was covering. We have great people on the science desk who were all over this. But I read and listened to a lot of the coverage because as an American, I too wanted to know what was happening. So I learned along with everyone else that one of the officials who stepped down was Dr. Dan Jernigan. He'd been at the CDC for 25 years, and he's led the agency's response to disease outbreaks around the world, like Ebola and SARS and West Nile. And he's a leading expert on flu and how to prevent a flu pandemic. Well, at the Georgia State Capitol last week, he described the current environment at the CDC as a death, where science is being sidelined by ideology. And in an interview with my colleague Elsa Chang, Dr. Jernigan said Americans now need to be cautious about communications coming out of the CDC. He said, you can no longer trust that their recommendations are based in science. You know, I took a great class my fellowship year here in the School of Public Health. It was taught by Brian Zickman Fisher. It was all about risk communication, how health experts can help regular people process the information that's out there and make good decisions for themselves. And I realized what Dr. Jernigan's saying is that the CDC can no longer do this basic public health function. And that's a really sobering message. And it's not just the CDC. I've had federal workers in other parts of the government tell me they're worried that the work they're doing for the benefit of the American people is also under threat. I heard this from people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is an agency that's been in the news a lot lately. It's the agency inside the Labor Department that puts out the monthly jobs report, the Consumer Price Index, which we just got today, and other economic indicators. And it's staffed by a couple thousand civil servants who crunch the numbers and produce these dry reports every month on schedule like clockwork. My colleague on the business desk, Scott Horsley, is my guide to everything about the BLS. He's always helping me navigate the website and pull up the data I need for stories. And Scott recently wrote in a story that the Bureau of Labor Statistics' informal motto is that the glass is neither half full nor half empty. It's 4 ounces of liquid in an 8-ounce glass. Now, BLS employees, past and present, have told me how important it is that they remain insulated from politics. Why? Because so many economic decisions made in this country are tied to the data they put out. The government itself uses the data when adjusting things like Social Security benefits. The Fed uses the data in deciding whether to raise or lower interest rates. Private companies make decisions about new investments and hiring and wages based on the data. And a former BLS commissioner, Erica Groshin, likes to describe the information that this agency puts out as infrastructure for our economy, just like roads and bridges. She told me there's a shared trust among the public that the workers who collect, process, and report the data are doing it free from political interference. And she told me even the perception that government data could be manipulated by politics could change that. Well, we're seeing how perceptions can change quickly. On the first Friday in August, the BLS published a not-so-great jobs report. Not only did American employers add fewer jobs than expected in July, but the previously published numbers for May and June were revised downwards, so the job gains that had been reported for those months were largely erased. President Trump went on his social media platform, Truth Social, to say the jobs numbers had been rigged to make him look bad, that the downward revision was a major mistake, and that he was firing the head of the BLS, Erica McIntyre. He said he would replace her with someone, quote, much more competent and qualified. I got a message late that night from someone who works at the BLS, a civil servant who was distressed about what had just happened. And going back to what I said about federal workers really caring about their work, I could tell he really wanted to speak to someone in that moment to defend the reputation of his agency. He took the time to explain to me why there are revisions to the jobs numbers. It's actually by design. The monthly jobs report is a preliminary estimate. It's based on a survey of employers every month, over 100,000 of them. And some months, some of these employers don't respond. Response rates have actually been falling in recent years. But the data collectors do their best to get back to these employers the next month or the month after that. And so sometimes you get a much fuller picture a couple months out. And then twice a year, the BLS puts out these annual revisions, first a preliminary version and then a final version. We just got one of these earlier this week. They take in even more information, drawing from unemployment insurance tax filings. This all made a lot of sense when the staffer explained it to me, but he told me he fears a lot of damage has already been done. He worries that Trump's supporters will just take the president's words that the numbers were rigged. And even those who doubt the numbers were rigged, he worries they might walk away thinking these revisions were just huge mistakes. And even those who understand the revisions process, well, now that Trump has fired the commissioner, they might not believe anything the agency puts out. So good jobs report, those people might think, well, Trump had a hand in that. And then beyond all of this, the staffer worries that the employers who participate in those monthly surveys may lose faith in the process and stop responding altogether, which would quickly degrade the quality of the data, making it harder to get an accurate count. Now, since I spoke with the staffer, the August jobs report was released, which showed further weakening of the labor market. And as I mentioned, we just got the preliminary annual revision on Tuesday that showed a significant downward revision for the year ending this past March. Keep in mind, most of that time, Biden was president, not Trump. And even as Trump has used these latest numbers to say the economy he inherited was worse than we thought, his administration has doubled down on its criticism of the BLS. Trump has vowed to bring reform to this agency he says is broken, and he's nominated a vocal critic of BLS to lead it. Meanwhile, last week, a group of current BLS employees released an unsigned statement urging the public to trust the numbers. They wrote, "The numbers will remain accurate and nonpartisan, and if that changes, the professionals will let you know." So that's my insight number 2. The federal government has a lot of dedicated workers who really care about the work they do, but many of them are feeling uneasy right now. And that ties in directly to my last insight. Stability used to be a hallmark of a federal government career, and that's no longer the case. I mentioned at the start of my talk that the federal government has about 2.4 million workers. I should have said had, past tense, because we now know from the Office of Personnel Management that by the end of December, 1 in 8 people who had jobs in the government in January will be out. So 300,000 federal employees gone by the end of this year in a few months. The federal government has never seen such a dramatic exodus in such a short span of time. And the Trump administration appears to be actually pretty happy or positive about this. The Office of Personnel Management's new director, Scott Cooper, told media outlets most of these departures, around 80%, were voluntary, although that comes with an asterisk. I know a lot of workers have felt they had no choice but to resign, like those CDC officials. But in interviews, Cooper has said this is a real opportunity to change the culture, to shake things up. He said, "We have great people, they just need a system that rewards efficiency." Well, already the Office of Personnel has been making changes, including to hiring processes, and even critics of the Trump administration support some of these changes. But now with 300,000 people leaving or already gone, there are real concerns about what might happen when you don't have the stability and the continuity in the workforce, when there aren't as many old-timers around to train the next generation to pass down the institutional knowledge. Some people might see this as a real plus, a shedding of old ways, a chance to bring in new ideas, new systems, AI. I think in the coming months, it'll start to become apparent what's working and what's not. And beyond this, we are also closely watching what the Trump administration is doing to expand its authority over the civil service in ways not seen in decades. You know, around 4,000 people who work in the federal government are political appointees who serve at the pleasure of the president. Everyone else is a civil servant whose work is supposed to be insulated from politics. But the president has made clear that he thinks many more of them should be at-will employees. In fact, the Trump administration has argued in court that the Constitution gives the president the power to remove anyone in the executive branch who wields executive authority. Their argument is that the president and his deputies must be able to supervise those who are carrying out the agenda that he ran on, his promises to the American people. Now, the president's critics are warning that he is trying to shift the civil service away from a merit-based system, taking us back more than 100 years to a time when the government ran on patronage. And they say this is dangerous. As one former government official put it, would you want the federal employee who's tracking floods in your area to be hired based on their political party or based on their knowledge and skills? What about air traffic controllers? The idea behind the merit-based system is that the government has to be dependable no matter who is in the White House. You can't have a mass exodus of employees every 4 or 8 years. You can't have a workforce fearful that they could be fired at every changeover of administration. So just to review what I've learned and shared with you today, the administration is moving fast and breaking things as Trump promised, at times bringing chaos to a workforce that is used to stability. Federal workers really care about what they do, and a lot of them are worried about the changes that are underway and what they will mean for the American public. And lastly, under Trump, stability is no longer a given. Now, before I wrap up, I just want to share a few more thoughts on what's ahead. There are now more than 300 lawsuits challenging the Trump administration's actions. I mentioned a couple of cases, but there are some really big, important ones that I haven't even gotten to, things like tariffs and immigration. And these lawsuits are ongoing. I constantly have to remind myself every time I'm writing a story that some of what we're seeing now could be reversed. And already there's been a lot of flip-flopping. In a number of cases, lower courts issued temporary stays only to be overruled by appeals courts. It's made reporting challenging because something is always happening. I remember with one of the probationary worker lawsuits, the first hearing was in late February. Some unions and civic organizations had sued the Trump administration over those firings in federal court in San Francisco. And the judge in the case, District Judge William Alsop, was hearing arguments, and the court was live streaming this all on Zoom. I was scheduled to do a live update on All Things Considered just after 6 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about this case and to talk about the arguments in court. But as the clock ticked closer to 6 p.m., the hearing was still going. And then I hear Judge Alsop say, "Okay, give me a moment. I'm going to offer some temporary relief. And I realized, oh no, he's going to rule from the bench. And I'm not someone who's like used to covering court cases. So I started panicking a little bit. And Judge Alsup, he's a Clinton appointee. He's now 80 years old. He was speaking very slowly, very deliberately, going through all the evidence. And at about 10 till 6, I really started thinking, oh my gosh, he's not going to wrap up in time for me to go live. And I can't talk while he's like actually ruling on, issuing some kind of ruling. So, and it's federal court, so you can't record it. And I'm a rule follower, so I wasn't recording it. I was just trying to take notes on what he was saying, and I was trying to slack, my colleagues at All Things Considered on the update team to say, like, you have to move me to the C segment. One of my colleagues later said, I was describing this, and he later said, oh, that sounds like a work nightmare I had one time. And it really was. But I remember clearly, even through all the distractions in that moment, how forcefully Judge Alsup spoke, how much conviction there was in his voice. He said the mass firing of these probationary employees was illegal and should be stopped, and he called probationary employees the lifeblood of our government. And he said the way they were fired was wrong. That was February 27th. On April 8th, the Supreme Court issued a decision on its emergency docket, or shadow docket, vacating Judge Alsup's order, reinstating these probationary workers while litigation continued. And at a hearing the next day, Judge Alsup said, I thought there was enough, but they're the boss. I'm just a district judge. And I realized then that despite the flurry of activity at the start, these cases are going to be long and drawn out, leaving the people at the center of the cases in limbo. And, now at the Supreme Court, these, shadow docket decisions are coming quite often. They're made without a public hearing and without a whole lot of explanation of the rationale behind the decisions. Sometimes there's no explanation at all. But the Supreme Court will hear arguments in some of these cases pretty soon, as soon as the next term starting in a few weeks. And there are some really important cases that appear headed to the Supreme Court, ones that could fundamentally change how much power the president has over the government and how much ability Congress and the courts have to weigh in, separation of power questions. We don't know how this is going to play out. I'm going to be leaning on Nina Totenberg to help explain what happens in court. But it is something we're going to be following closely and trying to make sense of, so I hope you'll tune in. Thank you again for having me here tonight. And
so we have time for questions, and I think we have Alexis there and Kate there with microphones. Just raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll make sure a microphone gets to you. We want to start here.
Do you think that there might come a point where lower court judges rise up against the Supreme Court judges because they know the law just as well?
I've heard the Trump administration is very unhappy about the fact that lower court judges are still issuing stays in a lot of these cases, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has handed down decisions on the shadow docket in very similar cases. So I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, that you've seen what the president has said about, the administration has said about these judges, calling them various names. So I think that they're doing their jobs, but I don't know how this is going to play out. I think we're waiting for the Supreme Court to actually hear the merits and hear arguments and issue decisions. And at that point, I think we will not see the lower court judges issuing stays in those same cases because there will be a precedent at that point. But I'm no Nina Totenberg, so I just it's sort of my basic knowledge of it.
Sound you keep hearing are
Acorns, right?
It's not a great day to have thuds happening above, but they're acorns.
You warned me. Somebody warned me about it. Maybe Candy did.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
So, having been in DC and dealing with sources from different departments and that kind of thing, I hear you talk a lot about your sources within the departments and within the civil service. How has it been having sources in the administration, or do you have sources in the administration who talk at all about what's coming or the rationale or any of that Do you like, what does that look
I would
like?
say almost none. I mean, I think some of my colleagues who are beat reporters do, but so many people have left, like so many people's sources have left the government, and so they don't. And I mean, I would say the administration, some departments are better than others at getting back to me. Like the Office of Personnel Management press person actually will write me back like in 5 minutes. Other people, like I was trying to reach the Federal Trade Commission last week, they just decided to drop the defense of the non-compete ban. That's a topic I had covered, and I was trying to get information, and I heard nothing, and then the press release shows up on their website. So some of the agencies don't talk to us. But yeah, I mean, I do think some of my beat reporter colleagues have better sourcing within the government.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for your talk. My question is twofold. First of all, to what extent, did this all happen under the purview of Doge, or what role did they play? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of these ideas actually did originate in Trump's first term. So before Doge, before that idea was floated, I mean, as an entity, and before Elon Musk was involved, like, this whole idea of converting a lot of the civil servants into at-will employees, that came up at the end of Trump's first term. It was called Schedule F back then. So the way my read of it is that they've not only they renamed it Schedule Policy Career, but they've also sort of turbocharged it, in that they're making the argument that almost anybody can be fireable by the president. I mean, that's the argument that they're saying the Constitution gives the president this power. And what we have heard from people who have worked in this administration is that between Trump's first term and now, he saw the Justice Department, try to prosecute. I mean, not try to prosecute him, and so he is much more willing to explore what powers he may have. So I think some of the, like the fork in the road, that was like something that Elon Musk had done at Twitter. And in fact, it was called Fork in the Road. The whole email was called the same. It was almost like the same email. And I don't know, the probationary employees, I can't remember if that was something they had floated before, but I think these ideas were around. And I think Doge gave them, I mean, it's now apparent to me and many people, they were very prepared with a plan to roll these out. And that's how it happened so fast. And I mean, just so fast that people couldn't keep up, really.
My second question is specific to the Department of Education, which Trump has said, or is I think, formally being dismantled. How does it actually look like?
I'm not sure. This is one of those lawsuits. I probably have an alert for it in Court Listener. I don't know what the status of that lawsuit is, but a lot of these, I don't know, I have to ask my colleagues, but what I'm guessing has happened is they've lost a lot of people to these, voluntary separation packages, like people, and I know that I think they shut down some offices, like the Civil Rights Office in the Education Department. But I also know education specifically was under a different lawsuit, and I'm not sure the status of that. But so far, again, the lower courts in some of these cases involving the government agencies ruled that, stayed the sort of dismantling, and then on appeal, those stays have been lifted. So the sort of, the net result is that people are not doing these jobs right now. I mean, not entirely gone, I don't think, but a lot of stuff is just not happening anymore. So whether it's formally shut down or not, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Did we have someone back here?
Hey, thanks for taking the time. Was curious, when you say by the end of the year we could have 1 of 8, that number, 300,000 jobs gone from the federal government. Can you tell me what, we've sort of talked about some of the immediate impacts, like on this program perhaps, right? With international students, we've heard of those issues affecting other college campuses, but like what other industries do you think maybe are more in the medium term going to feel those government job losses? Do you know?
I really don't know, because I don't know I don't know of the 300,000, like how many are coming out of different departments. I mean, I just hear anecdotally about things that are not happening, like with in USDA. I heard from a lot of USDA people. So, for example, like the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, they lost a lot of like what are they called, veterinarians in charge. So these are like state level veterinarians. And that work is really, I mean, they're sort of like the first call if there's a disease outbreak on a farm, and a lot of those people left. So I don't know whether they have temporarily put people in those roles, but I think some of the surveillance that they were doing of various diseases may, be hampered right now. And this is what I was hearing from people, but I don't know. I mean, this is something that we're trying to look at. Like I did look at, so one example, like the tax returns. I looked at, there was like a preliminary report of how quickly people were getting their tax returns. And there didn't seem to yet be an impact on that this year. And there's an office in the IRS that puts out these reports, but then someone said to me, like, well, I don't know if they're going to be around next year to put out this report. So I think there's a lot that we don't know. And I'm sure, again, like my beat reporter colleagues may have a better insight into their individual agencies that they cover.
Hi, thank you very much. It's been listening to you for years. It's great to actually see you.
Thank you.
Question about the overall federal workforce. You mentioned the number of people lost their jobs, about 300,000. The number I've seen that lost their collective bargaining rights is something like 800,000. President just...
Yeah, I mean, the union, AFG, American Federation of Government Employees, estimates it's about 1 million.
So what do you think the future of the federal workforce looks like when the work rules goes away and arbitration goes away? There's still civil service protection, but are those people employees at will, and what will that look like going forward?
Well, so my understanding is the loss of the union does not take away their civil service protections, but what happens with some of these court cases might. So, yeah, I mean, I hear a lot from the unions, and I've heard from, specific union member, like at the VA, like VA nurses. They're very worried about some of the things that they negotiated just going away, like including things like maternity and paternity, family leave policies. They're also worried about things they negotiated around safety on the job. They're worried about that going away. I think they still have, federal employees still have whistleblower rights. I mean, they have, there are other protections that still exist outside the unions. But certainly the unions are, they're, especially in places like the EPA, I think they're very concerned about what the loss of the union means for them. That's also one of these things that's still there are, I think, now like half a dozen lawsuits against specifically the collective bargaining executive order. There have been 2 now.
I really enjoyed your conversation. Your job sounds incredibly challenging. And it's the question I have for you with this kind of chaos, constant chaos that the administration is causing, the daily crisis, the hourly breaking news. How do journalists find time to step back and do the kind of analytical and contextual reporting that shows the impact of these things and hold the, when necessary, the people accountable?
That is really, that's our challenge, right? And I do feel like in the first couple months, we weren't doing a lot of that. We were just kind of doing incremental, like, here's the latest email. I don't know, I think we've ended up having to pick and choose what we write about. And this is like, I don't get nearly as many signal messages as I was back in February and March and April, but people will bring things to my attention and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't, I don't even know anything about this agency, or I've never even heard of this agency. We can't report on everything. And I think right now at this stage, we're kind of pivoting a little bit, at least for me, I feel like I need to pivot a little bit away from what is happening specifically to the federal workforce and to how is this impacting Americans more broadly. So I think that's, we're just making choices every day about what we cover given our limited resources.
We've got Charles up here and Alexis, there's a woman in an orange sweater back here.
So Andrea, this is a little off, is this on?
Yes.
It's a little off point, but I think everyone here would be interested in your comments. What has the effect been of the Trump administration on NPR, on its finances, the threat to its finances, and just the chilling effect of coverage?
I don't think there's been a chilling effect on our coverage. I will start with that. People here probably know there was the rescission vote, and so public media lost $1.1 billion. And that directly impacts our stations much more than it affects us in the immediate, immediately. And I need to say, I'm not speaking for the company, but these are sort of my own views on this. NPR, I think NPR gets something like 1% of NPR headquarters. Actually, you probably know this, right? All right, correct me if I make a mistake. 1% of 1 to 2% of our funding comes directly from the federal government, but we do get a lot. The stations that carry our programming pay member dues. They pay for our programming, and I've heard our CEO say something like 70 to 80 out of 250 stations are at risk right now of going dark. And so you can imagine if those stations go dark and they're not carrying our programming, not only will people in those markets not be able to hear our programming, but we will lose a big chunk of revenue. So that could have a real impact on us. I will say immediately after the rescission vote, the stations did some record fundraising. The communities really rallied around them, had these banner days, and I was in Louisville, Kentucky right after this happened, and the community had really come out for NPR, which was amazing to see. But whether it's a one-time thing or it's sustainable, I think that's the challenge going forward.
As a sociologist who actually is teaching this term, a course on America in Decline, I'm very interested in the narratives that are developing among the federal workers to explain the violence that happened to them. What do they what is the narrative like? Do they blame their organization, the federal state, or something else, or the Trump administration? Why do they think we came to this particular juncture in our society at this particular time? Likewise, of course, I'm also interested in what you as journalists make of where we are and why we are here at this particular juncture. Thank you.
Yeah, the federal workers, of course, I end up talking to the ones that reach out to me, so I do think that they are somewhat self-selecting, although I will say I hear from people from all over the country. I've heard from people who tell me I voted for Trump, and now I'm really upset about what's happening. I think they're baffled. I think they're still in this stage of thinking how can this be possible? Because the ones who are reaching out to me really believe that the work they're doing is so important, and they're seeing, they're worried about how can the government function, how can it provide these services without all of us. I think that they're really concerned. People at the FDA, for instance, who are seeing their colleagues who approve, new drugs and medical devices. They're thinking how can the public be safe if we don't have the experienced people? So yeah, I think there's a lot of blaming of this administration for not, for being too quick to want to put their mark on the government right now. But I will say, a lot of people I speak to, even as angry as they are, they say, yeah, of course there are things that should be better. There is waste, there is inefficiency. This woman I spoke to at the Social Security Administration, she said, I started in 1991 or something, and she's like, we're still using the same computer system. And I had hoped that Elon Musk was going to come in and upgrade our systems. And she said, instead, they've gotten rid of all the people who know how to run these antiquated systems, and we don't have the new system. So, I think that we'll see, again, I don't expect any company to introduce a new software overnight. NPR, it takes years for us to introduce the new content management system. But I think people are angry at this administration. I think some are just, more than that, they're just really just kind of shocked that this has happened.
I'm so glad that you raised your hand and that you're here. And Andrea, stay up here for a moment. And I hope that you'll come straight up when we're finished to talk to Andrea. And I just want to thank you. I know you were really nervous about doing this.
When Lynette asked me, I wanted to say no.
You did try to say no.
Okay. Yeah.
So some former fellows in her class encouraged her to think about it and say yes. And I asked Andrea because I found myself. I'm obviously a regular NPR listener, and whenever her stories would, and we knew one another from working there together, but when her stories would come on, they would be driveway stories for me because things were happening so fast, and I had such a hunger for knowing what was happening. And, you know, every time I heard your voice, I was reassured that reporters were trying to keep up and that you were talking not just about what was coming out of the White House, but talking to the people that it was affecting. And so I'm just so grateful to you for your work, and keep going. And when people do reach out to reporters, I just want to encourage you to reach out to reporters with the things that you're experiencing. There is a reporter on the other end of that signal, text, or email or voicemail that you leave, who is trying to think deeply about the things that you're going through. And every year Alexis, could you come up just to help me for a second? We have the Hovey Bowl, a tradition that Charles started for our speaker, and so it is a pleasure to present you with this bowl to keep as a reminder of your time here.
Thank you.
You can put your Ralph Williams t-shirt in it.
That's lovely. Thank you.
And when you walked into Wallace House today, right inside the front door, and the fellows have seen this plaque hangs in front of right inside the front door of every Hovey speaker, and you are now on the plaque. We're going to have to get a bigger one, Charles, because we've got one more year to go. Yes, and this could feel very cryptic, that next year's not going to be the end, we promise, of civilization. So we're going to get a bigger plaque and keep adding names to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette.
Can I get a photo?